Picture this. It's the middle of July. The heat has been sitting on your garden for 3 weeks straight, and there's no rain in the forecast. You walk out early in the morning before the sun gets high, and the ground crunches under your boots, dry, cracked, split open like old leather. You look down the rows and you know exactly what's coming next. The soil needs mulch, and that's where the misery starts. You drive around looking for straw, comparing prices, hauling bales in the back of a truck, spreading it by hand, sweating, itching, sneezing from the dust. Or you spend 2 entire weekends cutting grass, drying it, hauling it, spreading it, and 2 weeks later you get to do the whole thing again. Because straw blows away in the wind, grass mats down and rots, mulch soaks through and disappears, and by the end of the month, the ground is bare again. Sound familiar? Then keep listening, because there is a way to walk away from that job permanently. Not reduce it, end it. And it takes exactly 2 plants, both of which cost pocket change. But first, a question worth sitting with. Have you ever walked through a real forest? Not a park, not a windbreak, but an old, dense, living forest. Do you remember what the ground felt like under your feet? Soft, damp, dark. Even in the worst heat of August, it's cool down there under the canopy, and the soil doesn't crack and it doesn't turn to dust. Nobody mulches it. Nobody wheels a cart of straw into the woods and spreads it between the roots. And yet, that soil is alive, loose, full of moisture, and absolutely crawling with life. Why? Because nature figured out its own protection system a very long time ago. It's called living cover. It means the ground is always wearing something. Leaves, grass, moss, decaying matter, new plants pushing up through the remains of the old. The soil is never naked, and that is precisely why it stays alive. Now think about what happens on most home gardens. You pull the weeds, you clear the spent plants, you till it up, and then you leave the soil open to the sun and the wind. Then you complain that everything dried out. Then you buy mulch. Then you till again, clear again, leave it bare again. Round and round, year after year. It's a war against nature, when the whole time there was an option to work with her instead. The way out is almost insultingly simple. You just copy nature's own recipe. And that's exactly what this is about. Here's the core of the method. You sow certain plants that very quickly form a dense green carpet. That carpet shields the ground from sun, from wind, from evaporation. Weeds don't come up under it because there simply isn't enough light for them. The roots of these plants loosen the soil better than any shovel ever will. And when the plants finish their life cycle, they lay themselves down on the ground and turn into organic fertilizer, free, on their own, without you lifting a finger. That's living mulch. And 2 plants do all of it better than anything else you could put in the ground. Before the names though, one thing needs saying. Most people are taught that a garden demands constant supervision. That without you standing over it, everything goes wrong. That you have to be there intervening, correcting, fixing. That isn't true. The smartest growers, the ones who have been at this for 30 and 40 years, all say the same thing. The best garden is the one that runs itself. You sow and you harvest, and nature handles the middle. These 2 plants are the first real step toward that kind of garden. Ready? Here they are. The first one is phacelia. The second is mustard. That's it. Simple, cheap, and familiar to a lot of people as cover crops. But here they're being used a little differently. Not just to rebuild soil in the off-season, but as a living, breathing, working mulch during the season. And once you understand how they actually pull it off, the question you'll be asking is why nobody told you sooner. Start with phacelia. This plant is so versatile that beekeepers grow it for honey, farmers grow it as a cover crop, and gardeners grow it just because it's pretty. But its real power is speed and density. Phacelia seed germinates at soil temperatures as low as the upper 30s. That means you can sow it in very early spring, almost as soon as the snow is off the ground. The soil is still cold, and phacelia is already working. Within 7 to 10 days of sowing, the first seedlings show up. Small, delicate, but there are a lot of them all at once, and they gain strength fast. In 2 to 3 weeks, the planting forms a dense green cushion 4 to 6 inches tall. In a month, it's a genuine living carpet that completely covers the surface of the ground. Under that carpet, the soil never sees the sun. It doesn't overheat. Moisture doesn't evaporate. On a hot day, the soil temperature under a phacelia canopy runs 15 to 18 degrees cooler than the bare bed next to it. 15 degrees is an enormous difference to the roots of a tomato or a cucumber. It's the difference between a plant spending its energy on survival and a plant spending its energy on growth and fruit. And that's only the beginning. Phacelia releases compounds into the soil, organic acids and natural plant chemistry, that suppress weed germination. Flatgrass, thistle, pigweed, chickweed. They simply stop pushing up where phacelia is growing. Not because someone pulled them, but because they can't get started in those conditions. No light, no space, no chemical signal telling them it's safe to grow. That's a natural defense system running for free, 24 hours a day. The root system works on several levels at once. Surface roots build a loose, airy structure in the top 4 inches. Deeper roots run down 8 to 12 inches and break apart compacted layers that a garden fork never reaches. After phacelia dies back or gets cut, the soil is left threaded with a network of fine channels. Air moves down through them. Water soaks in through them. The ground after phacelia goes light as feathers, loose without tilling, alive without fertilizer. And here's a benefit that rarely gets mentioned. When phacelia blooms, and it blooms in these gorgeous blue-violet curled clusters, turns into a pollinator paradise. Bees and bumblebees come in from everywhere. That matters enormously if you've got cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, apples, or berries anywhere nearby. Everything that needs pollinating gets pollinated thoroughly the entire time the phacelia is in flower. Some beekeepers plant entire fields of it just for the honey. In your garden, it grows itself between the rows and the empty beds in the back corner and pollinates everything around it as a bonus. Now, mustard. White mustard or brown mustard, it doesn't much matter. Both work the same way and both pair perfectly with phacelia. Mustard is the speed champion. 3 to 5 days after sowing, you can already see the first loops breaking the surface. Within a week, little rosettes. Within 2 weeks, plants 6 to 8 inches tall with broad leaves that shut the surface down completely. Mustard grows faster than phacelia, and that's exactly why the two belong together. Mustard grabs the ground first and denies the weeds a foothold while phacelia is still building strength. But mustard's real superpower is sanitation. Mustard roots and tissue contain compounds called glucosinolates, and when they break down in contact with moist soil, they convert into natural fungicides and pest suppressants, wireworm, nematodes, root rot pathogens. Soil-borne blight. All of it gets knocked back and some of it gets eliminated outright. Mustard literally cleans the ground it grows in. If you've been losing a fight with wireworm for several years running, sow mustard. Plenty of growers report that after 2 or 3 sowings, the wireworm pressure drops dramatically. Not to zero, but far enough that the crop stops suffering for it. Mustard also does serious work on soil biology. It creates conditions that favor beneficial bacteria and fungi, the ones that break down organic matter, help plants take up nutrients, and build a living humus that gardeners pay a lot of money for in bottles. Mustard does it for free just by being there. One more thing about mustard. It thrives in cool weather. In early spring, when it's still cold and everything else is only thinking about germinating, mustard is already standing up as a green wall. In late fall, when everything else has been cleared out, mustard is still green and holding until a hard freeze finally takes it. So it protects the ground precisely during the windows when nothing else can. Now the important part, how the two work as a team. Phacelia and mustard are an ideal pairing. They don't compete with each other. Mustard closes the ground first. Phacelia catches up and builds a taller, denser canopy over the top. What you end up with is 2-tier protection. The lower tier is mustard, with broad horizontal leaves shading the maximum amount of surface. The upper tier is phacelia, with fine feathery foliage that throws shade and holds humidity. Together, they make a cover that no weed is punching through. Quackgrass can't do it. Thistle can't do it. Lamb's quarters can't do it. No light, no light. So how do you actually sow it? The details matter here. Get them right and the result will beat your expectations. Rush it or skip a step and the effect drops off. The first step is timing. Phacelia mustard can go in the ground anywhere from early spring through the middle of September. The ideal moment is as soon as the ground has thawed a shovel's depth. Don't wait for warm weather. These plants aren't afraid of cold. Spring sowing is especially valuable because you're closing the ground before the weeds even wake up. Remember, most weed seed germinates when soil hits the mid to upper 40s. Mustard and phacelia go at just under 40. That means you can occupy the territory before the weeds get there. That's the whole key that to pick and prefers you to rave. Pull out the big clods. the rocks, and last year's plant debris. Anything that stops seed from making contact with soil. The surface should be reasonably level and crumbly. That's all. Nothing else is required. The third step is the seed. Buy phacelia and buy mustard. Any garden center or seed catalog carries both, and they're cheap. Mix them together in roughly equal proportions. Figure about a gram of the mix per square foot, roughly an ounce for every 30 square feet of bed. That is not much seed at all. A single packet costing a few dollars will cover a surprising amount of ground. The fourth step is sowing, and it's the easiest thing in the entire method. Take the seed in your hand and broadcast it across the surface of the bed, evenly, no piles. You don't need furrows, you don't need spacing. You don't need a measuring tape, just scatter it. Nature will sort out the rest. The only thing that matters is that it's spread more or less evenly, and more or less is genuinely good enough. Nature isn't geometrically precise, and neither does she need to be. The fifth step is covering the seed. Once it's broadcast, work it lightly into the soil. The simplest way is to run a rake across the bed, sideways, just stirring the top half inch. Some seed gets buried, some stays right at the surface, and that's fine. You can also just walk across the bed and firm it down with your boots. That improves seed-to-soil contact and speeds up germination. Planting depth should be half an inch, maybe a little more, no deeper. Those seeds are small, and from too far down, they'll never make it up. The sixth step is water. If the soil is damp from rain or snowmelt, skip it. If the soil is dry, water the bed after sowing. Don't flood it, just wet the top layer. After the seed comes up, you'll barely need the water at all. Phacelia and mustard are extremely tough, and they handle drought well, precisely because they're holding moisture underneath their own canopy. Now, where and when to use this method, because it's versatile, and there are several very different ways to put it to work. The first scenario is spring bed preparation. As soon as the ground thaws, sow. Before you set out a single transplant while the garden is still waking up, let phacelia and mustard take the space. In 3 to 4 weeks, you'll have a thick green cover. That's right about when it's time to set out tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. So you cut the green growth off at soil level, spread it right there between the planting spots, and put your transplants in through it. The cut greens immediately start protecting the ground, holding moisture, and smothering whatever weeds are left. And the roots still in the soil begin breaking down and feeding it organic matter. Perfect bed prep without buying a single bag of anything. The second scenario is sowing between the rows, and this is probably the smartest use of the whole technique. You plant your main crops, tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, cucumbers, at your normal spacing. Then you broadcast the phacelia and mustard mix in taxpayers' knowledges and that don't crowd their neighbors. What they do is close the ground between the rows, which is exactly where weeds always show up first. No hoeing between rows, no hauling mulch. You just sow and the living cover handles it. Later in the season, when the main crop grows big enough to shade its own ground, the green mulch fades out on its own. That's fine. It already did its job. The third scenario is filling holes. Hold the early radishes, sow. Lifted the garlic, sow. Cut the first flush of lettuce, sow. The ground should never be left naked. That's the golden rule of natural gardening. Every single time an open patch appears in a bed, fill it immediately with phacelia and mustard. In 2 or 3 weeks, there's green cover on it again. It keeps the soil from drying and cracking, and it denies the weeds their opening. And in a month or 6 weeks, you can plant a main crop right back in the ground that didn't degrade while it sat. It improved. The fourth scenario is preparing for winter. After the harvest is in, don't leave beds empty until spring. That's a common and costly mistake. Bare ground over winter means lost structure, wind erosion of the topsoil, and the death of a huge share of the soil life. Sow phacelia and mustard in late August or early September. They'll come up and put on real growth before the frost. Light frost doesn't hurt them. Both handle temperatures down into the low 20s. Then, when the hard freezes arrive, they die and lay themselves flat on the ground, forming a dense organic blanket. That blanket protects the soil from deep freezing, keeps the beneficial organisms alive down below, and in spring, as it thaws, becomes the first feeding of the new season. The fifth scenario is rehabilitating worn-out ground. There's a corner of the garden where the soil is generally bad, dry, hard, or matted with weeds. Don't give up on it. Sow phacelia and mustard there, and not once but several times in a row. Spring, summer, and fall. Every time the plants reach 8 to 12 inches, cut them and leave them lying right where they fell. After 1 or 2 seasons, that ground will start to change. It gets softer. It gets darker. Earthworms show up. it starts holding water. That's not magic. That's organic matter you put back, plus roots that loosen the ground from the inside, plus soil biology that finally had conditions worth living in. Now, some details that usually get left out. The first one, don't be afraid to sow thick. A lot of beginners think they should sow sparsely so the plants have room. For living mulch, that's backwards. The goal here is maximum density. The thicker the stand, the tighter the cover, the harder it suppresses weeds and holds moisture. Don't be stingy with seed. It costs almost nothing, and the payoff from a heavy stand is many times greater. The second, no herbicides. It seems obvious, but it's worth saying plainly. If you want phacelia and mustard to function as living mulch, don't bring chemistry into it. They'll deal with the weeds themselves. Any chemical intervention wrecks the soil biology you just started rebuilding. Trust the system, it works. The third, don't rake off the cut greens. This is the single most common mistake people make with cover crops. You cut the phacelia or the mustard, and the instinct is to gather up all that green material and haul it away, because it looks messy. Don't. Leave the biomass right there on the bed and spread it evenly. Within a few days, it wilts down and lies flatter. Within a week, it starts breaking down. Within 2 weeks, you can lift a handful and see damp, soft soil underneath. That is the mulch working. Break it off and you've thrown away half the benefit. The fourth, mustard and the cabbage family. There's one real restriction to know about. Mustard is a brassica, the same family as cabbage, radish, turnip, broccoli, and kohlrabi. Plants in one family share diseases, and clubroot is the serious one. So don't sow mustard ahead of cabbage, radish, or turnips in the same bed. Use phacelia alone in those beds. Phacelia is neutral and compatible with essentially every garden crop there is. For everything outside the cabbage family, the phacelia and mustard mix is ideal. The phacelia alone in those beds. Phacelia is neutral and compatible with essentially every garden crop there is. For everything outside the cabbage family, the phacelia and mustard mix is ideal. The phacelia alone in those beds. Phacelia is neutral and compatible with essentially every garden crop there is. For everything outside the cabbage family, the phacelia and mustard mix is ideal. Even limp, those plants are still covering the ground and still holding moisture. As soon as the heat breaks, they bounce back. If you want help them through a hot stretch, a light watering in the morning or evening is plenty. Now for what's happening below the surface, because living mulch isn't just a nice green carpet. It's an entire ecosystem you're switching on, and understanding it makes it much easier to trust. Under a phacelia and mustard canopy, a specific microclimate forms. Soil temperature stays stable without the violent swings from baking to chilled. Humidity stays constant without the drying cycles. Air exchange is good because roots keep opening new channels. In those conditions, life you can't see starts to flourish. And that invisible life is the actual foundation of fertility. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, beneficial nematodes, that whole underground community only functions properly under stable conditions. Sharp temperature swings, drying out, waterlogging, those are what kill it. Living mulch removes all three threats at once. Earthworms deserve a special mention. They love exactly what phacelia and mustard create. Damp, loose, organically rich soil is their ideal home. Start using this method and within a few months you'll notice the worm population climbing noticeably. And every earthworm is a living cultivator. It moves through the soil, loosening it, leaves behind tunnels that carry water and air, and its castings are among the most valuable natural fertilizers that exist. More worms means better soil. Better soil means a better harvest. It really is that direct. There's another piece worth understanding. When phacelia and mustard break down, after cutting or after winter, they aren't just adding bulk organic matter. They're delivering specific nutrients. Phacelia is rich in nitrogen, the one plants need in their early growth to build leaf and stem. Mustard carries sulfur, which improves the uptake of other nutrients and helps sanitize the soil. Both contain potassium, phosphorus, and calcium, everything you normally buy in a bag. Except here it's free, and it arrives in a form the soil biology processes far more efficiently than mineral salts. A fair question comes up, can you skip fertilizer entirely if you use phacelia and mustard? The honest answer depends on where your soil is starting from. If it's genuinely poor, you'll probably want to add some organic matter in the first year, but by the second and third season of regular sowing, a lot of growers report yields that match the beds where they were feeding heavily. The reason is that living mulch builds a closed nutrient loop. Nutrients stop leaving the system. They come back every time the plants die and decompose. A few real examples are worth hearing. The names have been changed, but the experiences are real. Gail, who grows in southern Ohio, fought wireworm in her potato patch for years. She was losing up to a third of her crop every season to riddled tubers. She tried everything: granules in the furrow, bait traps, rotation. Nothing helped. 3 years ago, she started sowing mustard on that plot in the fall and again in early spring. By the third year, the wireworm pressure had dropped so far that her potato losses were essentially nil. The wireworm didn't vanish, but the population collapsed far enough that the crop stopped suffering. Michael, in central Georgia, had 30 years of gardening behind him and was flatly skeptical about the whole idea. He was used to doing it the old way: turn the soil, straw mulch, water constantly. Eventually, he tried sowing phacelia in the gaps between his tomatoes, mostly to prove a point. The results surprised him. He watered half as often because the ground under the fascia held moisture far better. Weeds in the rows practically disappeared, and the tomatoes outwielded his usual crop. His own explanation is that the soil never overheated, so the roots got to work in comfortable conditions all season. Aaron, a first-time gardener in upstate New York, took over a neglected rental plot. The soil was terrible, hard, dry, and buried under quackgrass and thistle. Instead of trying to plant vegetables into that, she spent her entire first summer sowing and cutting phacelia and mustard 3 times over. By fall, the ground was unrecognizable, soft, dark, full of worms. The following year, she pulled a normal harvest off it without buying compost by the truckload and without pouring on fertilizer. Just living mulch. Those stories aren't unusual. There are thousands of them, because this isn't a marketing trick. It's an actual natural process. It was working long before anyone invented the vegetable garden, and it'll keep working as long as there's soil. Back to practice, because there are several advanced techniques that make the whole thing even more effective. The first is layered sowing. Sow the mustard, wait 3 days, then broadcast phacelia over the top. Mustard comes up first and takes the lower tier. Phacelia, germinating a bit behind it, takes the upper. The result is a 2-story canopy at maximum density. This works especially well for spring sowings when the priority is closing the ground fast. The second is blending in other cover crops. Add a little clover or vetch seed to the phacelia and mustard mix and you get something even better. Clover pulls nitrogen out of the air and puts it in your soil. Vetch builds biomass quickly. All of them coexist happily. What you end up with is living mulch that doesn't just protect the ground, but actively feeds it. The third is cutting in stages. Instead of mowing the whole bed at once, cut half. When the remaining half finishes flowering and starts dropping seed, cut that half too. What you get is a self-renewing stand. The fallen seed produces the next flush of growth on its own. Do that and you stop buying seed for that area. The planting regenerates itself. The fourth is using living mulch under cover. A lot of people assume you don't need it in a greenhouse or a high tunnel, since it's already warm and humid in there. In fact, that's where it's most valuable. It stabilizes soil temperature. It pulls in pollinators, which is critical for tomatoes and cucumbers in an enclosed space. And it improves air exchange in the soil, which helps prevent the root rots that are especially dangerous under cover. Sow phacelia right between the tomato rows. When it starts blooming, leave a vent or a door open. The bees will find their own way in. The fifth is treating it as a second crop. After you pull the cucumbers in late August, don't leave that bed sitting empty until next year. Sow phacelia and mustard. Before the cold arrives, they'll reach 8 inches or so. That's another layer of organic matter headed back into the soil, plus 1 more round of mustard sanitizing effect cleaning the ground before next season. Here's what surprises people most when they first try this. It isn't that the soil improves. It isn't even that the weeds mostly disappear. It's how much less time the garden takes. That sounds like a paradox because you're adding an operation. You're sowing cover crops now. But dozens of other jobs vanish. Weeding goes away. Frequent watering goes away. The endless mulch hauling cycle goes away. Pest management shrinks because there are fewer pests. The annual load of fertilizer drops. Net result, you spend somewhere between half and a third of the time you used to, and you harvest as much or more. That's not a slogan. That's what natural gardening actually is. The premise is simple. Stop fighting nature and start working alongside her. Nature spent millions of years refining these mechanisms. She knows how to rebuild fertility, suppress pests, retain water, and protect soil. All you have to do is help her switch those mechanisms on in your particular patch of ground. Phacelia and mustard are the switch. Now the money, because most gardeners count their costs, and they're right to. Add up what you spend every year on mulch. Straw, wood chips, landscape fabric, bagged compost, peat. It adds up, and it adds up fast. Then add the time, hauling, spreading, replacing, doing it again in 6 weeks. How many hours a year go into mulching alone? Now price the seed. The 3.5-ounce packet of phacelia covers 200 to 300 square feet and runs a handful of dollars. Mustard is cheaper still. A half-pound bag costs about the same and covers a large plot. To cover 1,000 square feet of beds, you're looking at maybe $15 in seed, and what you get for it replaces the entire mulch budget, plus soil improvement, plus a smaller fertilizer bill, plus a lot less labor. The savings are obvious, but the money isn't really the point. The point is that you're building living, healthy soil that gets better every year instead of worse. That's capital. It compounds. It's an investment in the garden you'll have 5 years from now. And a word for anyone working a small plot: quarter acre, an eighth, a few raised beds in a backyard. It's easy to assume natural methods are for people with acreage. The opposite is true. Small plots are exactly where living mulch shows the biggest effect, because every square foot counts. On a small plot, you can't afford to lose a crop to drought or weeds or exhausted soil. That's precisely where phacelia and mustard earn their keep, letting you use every scrap of ground without wearing it out. One more thing that has to be said: consistency matters. A single sowing won't transform your garden, though you'll feel a difference even from the first one. The real effect: deep soil rebuilding, weeds down for good, structure improving year over year, arrives after 2 or 3 seasons of steady use. Once you start thinking about soil as a living organism that needs ongoing care rather than occasional treatment, everything else falls into place. Sow phacelia and mustard regularly. Don't leave ground bare. The ground will pay it back with interest. The question that comes up a lot: can you just let phacelia and mustard grow all the way to flowering, or even to seed? Technically, yes. Practically, it isn't always convenient. With mustard ripened seed, it self-sows enthusiastically, and next year you'll have mustard coming up in places you didn't plan for. That's not a disaster. Mustard isn't a difficult weed and it pulls easily, but as a rule, it's better to cut the plants at bud stage or the very start of bloom. That's when they hold the most nutrients and their biomass is worth the most to the soil. Phacelia is worth letting flower. For the bee's sake, cut it after the bloom. Phacelia doesn't self-sow nearly as aggressively, so it rarely causes trouble. It's also worth knowing how this fits with other natural gardening practices. Living mulch pairs beautifully with composting. Work compost into a bed before sowing the cover crop, and the plants use those nutrients to build an even denser stand. When that stand gets cut and breaks down, it adds another layer of organic matter on top. The nutrient cycle gets tighter every pass. It pairs well with wood chips too. A lot of growers run this exact system: heavy wood chips on the paths between beds, phacelia and mustard on the beds themselves. The chips keep mud off your boots, smother weeds in the walkways, and slowly break down to feed the soil. The living mulch does its work in the beds. The result is a garden that looks cared for and takes very little labor to maintain, and it works with drip irrigation. If you've already got drip lines in, phacelia and mustard only amplify what they do. Water gets delivered straight to the root zone, and the living canopy stops it evaporating off the surface. The water savings from that combination can hit 60 or 70% compared to an open, bare bed. So why isn't everyone doing this already? If it's this effective and this cheap, why are most gardeners still mulching the old way? A few reasons. First is inertia. People garden the way their parents and grandparents gardened. If grandma mulched with straw, straw must be correct. A new method has to be understood first and then actually attempted, and plenty of people would rather not change. The second is that the information doesn't travel well. Lots of gardeners know about cover crops. Far fewer know about using them as living mulch during the growing season. Agronomists and soil scientists have known this for decades. It just spreads slowly. The third is fear of getting it wrong. The garden is an investment of labor and money, and people don't want to gamble a season on an experiment. But here's the thing, it's nearly impossible to get phacelia and mustard wrong. Even if the stand comes up patchy, even if the timing isn't perfect, you still get cover and you still get benefit. These are extraordinarily forgiving plants. The fourth is short-term thinking. People want results today. A bag of mulch produces a visible result within the hour. Living mulch is a process that unfolds over weeks. It requires a little patience, and it repays that patience many times over. And the fifth is a preference for tidiness. A lot of gardeners want the beds to look correct. Straight rows, clean bare earth between them. Living mulch looks different. It's a green, slightly unruly carpet. To some eyes, that reads as messy. Look at it from the other direction, and it reads as a garden that's alive, breathing, and working. That's not disorder. That's a natural system running. So that's the whole picture. Two plants that can change the way you garden. Phacelia and mustard aren't just cover crops. They're allies. They're the tools you use to build living, healthy, productive soil without breaking your back and without spending much of anything. They germinate fast and close the ground fast. They suppress weeds without chemicals. They hold moisture without constant watering. They improve soil structure without tilling. They sanitize the ground without expensive products. They bring in pollinators without any effort on your part. And in the end, they turn themselves into free, organic fertilizer. All of that for the price of a couple of seed packets and half an hour of your time. Here's the one thing worth doing right now, while this is fresh. Decide which bed you're going to try this on next season. Just one bed. Sow phacelia and mustard on it and watch what happens. A month later, you'll come back to that bed and find the soil damp, soft, and alive with almost no weeds in it. And you'll say what thousands of gardeners have said before you. Why did nobody tell me about this sooner? Nature doesn't ask much of us. She asks for one thing, a chance. Scatter the seed, let it come up, and she'll handle everything after that. Exactly as she's done for millions of years without us. And if we're smart about it, alongside us, the garden isn't a battlefield. It's a partnership. And two very ordinary plants can be where that partnership starts. This season, in your own backyard.